start off just with something that's been in the news quite frequently lately, the liquor sale changes. So obviously there was a pretty big article broken by the Star about the way the beer store handles and affects the liquor sales in Ontario. And you said you were going to make some changes followed by the beer store, kind of changing their policy and doing some damage control. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So there are two ways into the story. One is that we had said during our budget that we were going to be looking at the assets of the Ontario government as a whole. We were going to be looking at the LCBO, we were going to be looking at Hydro One and OPG, and figuring out whether they were operating to the maximum capacity for the people of Ontario. So that's one, and we asked Ed Clark, who's the former CEO of the TD Bank, to work with a group of people to give us some recommendations. And he has made recommendations about how to change the relationship between the beer store and the LCBO to actually maximize the effectiveness and the efficiency of both. But that means changing the deal that the beer store has. So that's one way into the story. The other way is that I've been concerned for some time about the ability of craft brewers to actually have access to the market in Ontario. And my understanding of the way brewers retail started many years ago was that there was to be much more equitable access for all brewers. So I was already concerned about that. Ed Clark came along. He's going to make some recommendations about changing the way the beer store operates. And so I'm going to follow his recommendations. The beer store has come out with a bit of a proposal at this point. That's going to become grist for that discussion. It's all part of the discussion. But we're going to wait for Ed Clark's recommendations, and that will be part of the budget.
Okay.
So nobody will have to wait very long because the budget will be out in the spring.
Perfect. And last winter, the Ontario Corner Store sent a petition to be able to sell alcohol in the province. Do you see that issue resurfacing with this petition?
It could resurface. It's always there under the surface. One of the things that Ed Clark has already said is that he believes that the distribution network of the beer store and the LCBO are good, and that they can be maximized, but that we don't need to look at a different distribution network. So we're not looking at corner stores.
Perfect. And in the recent election, I think all of the other parties kind of pointed out a lot of the issues with OSAP and with the equality and some of the issues that come out with just running that program. Now that you're keeping the program, how are you looking to make sure that all students who need it it's accessible and that it's available to everyone who really does need it rather than just...
So we expanded our understanding. When we came into office, we expanded our approach to the kind of student support. We moved away from just having loans. We put in place grants, and then more recently we put in place a 30% off tuition grant because we felt that there needed to be something that helped sort of lower to middle income students to access post-secondary. So those are the major initiatives that we have put in place. I'll let Reza speak to any other issues that might be raised.
Well, thank you, Premier. It's a very good question. But since we came to the office about 11 years ago, now it's going to be 12 years now, we have basically increased, as Premier indicated, in the past there was only law. Now we have about more than 20 ways of scholarships, grants, bursaries, loans to students. This year, for example, we are spending at least $1.3 billion in student assistance to our students in this province. This is a big investment which we are making, so that every student in Ontario, they will have access for education, for post-secondary education. So access for post-secondary education is based, according to us, according to this project, to this government, to this Premier, based on the ability of a person to learn, not the ability to pay. That's our mantra. So every student who has the ability to learn, assistance, so the student assistance is there for that person in the form of bursary, grant, tuition, OSAP, and so on and so forth.
And the 30% off tuition grant, 230,000 more students have access because of that grant. So just that one mechanism has.
We understand recently we indexed OSAP. So this one has indexed OSAP, indexed minimum wage, indexed the child benefit. So these three major social services program in that set, what it says, has been indexed by inflation. So it's all the politics. Every year, as inflation goes up, the student assistance goes up. also what we have done recently is that students, they pay for their tuition fee in 2 terms. As they get their OSAP, they pay afterwards. So it's not like in the past when they pay upfront. So these are some of the things we have done to assist our students. So,
I'd like to also talk
and
about,
one thing
sorry.
more, sorry, I can still get it. You know, all these student assistance when you pay for students, sometimes people think that, well, you know, we pay the student loan is just a loan they have to return. But there's a cap to that. So if your loan is more than $7,400, about $7,400 is for your basically it's grant. So when you put all these assistance programs into one pot, you will see that 70% of assistance program which government paid gives to the student is not paid. It's basically free money grant given to the students. It's a huge number, 70%.
I'd like to talk about international students. Obviously here at Waterloo we have a very large ratio of international versus domestic students. Recently there's some press, especially with the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance for the president, Jen Carter. She's been talking a lot about how international students are being treated as cash cows, and as there's no cap on their tuition, I think recently MAC, they increased their tuition for international students by 30% in 1 year. What are you guys doing to protect international students from being treated like just someone who's making up the difference and balancing the books?
Well, I'm going to let Reza speak to the specifics, but I want to just say that one of the questions that was raised downstairs was about international students and that international experience, and then there was a question about interprovincial experience. I think we have to more and more see ourselves as citizens of the world, you know. I think there's been a tendency in Canada, and I can speak about Ontario, not to necessarily think globally. And so we need to do that. We need to think of ourselves as part of the world. And I think that relationship between international students coming here and our education system is a very important aspect of that, you know, because we broaden the experience of our own citizens, kids who grow up here, by having exposure to people from around the world. And we share that knowledge across the world. So the motivation for having international students come is about having the best talent from all over the world here in Ontario. And as Reza has said, having our students go to other parts of the world and share in that experience. In terms of the money piece, there's no doubt about it that there has been an advantage to institutions having international students come, but that can't be the primary focus.
Can I add just something quickly in there? My daughter actually works for U of T and is actually the administrator and the credential of the International Graduate Program for University of Toronto. And she said that some of the students come for, you know, their whole program, but often they will come to U of T as one part of their postgraduate education. So they may choose to come to U of T for one semester and then they're going to Italy for another one. But vice versa, a lot of our Ontario students then reciprocally are able to go across and complete their education internationally. And I think it speaks to what you're talking about, more of a global experience. And many of them are not looking just at one university to go to do all their programming. It's part of a bigger picture in terms of where they want to get the experience to be able to drive their program home.
Just on the money side of it, basically. You know, when you look at the cost of post-secondary education in other countries, for example, in the United States, fees, school fees, tuition fees are about $40,000 to $50,000 in independent universities such as Stanford, you know, independent or private universities. For other countries, for example, in Turkey, for instance, I was in Turkey with the president in December, and I learned that they call it foundation universities or private universities. They're charging about maybe $40,000 for their own students who are going to those private, so-called private universities. The fact of the matter is that university education costs. I mean, look at this university, how much Ontario government, our taxpayers, ourselves have paid to build this university and other institutions. So when our people go to other countries for education, they charge more or less the same fee. And when people come to Ontario to continue their education, they have to pay for at least part of that.
Well, and I think another way of looking at it is that we subsidize more of the education of the students from Ontario than we do subsidize, because we do subsidize, you know, the government subsidizes hugely the education of students, so it's less of a subsidy. That's a different way of looking at it.
Do you think there should be a yearly cap on how much a university can increase a tuition of like an international student per year? Because obviously you can only increase the domestic student tuition so far, whereas the instance with MAC, 30% in 1 year is a really big jump. Do you think that's acceptable, or should that be dealt with?
I think Diane wanted to jump in and say something.
Well,
that may or may not be.
I may not necessarily speak right to that, but international students do shop around. The fact that there are so many who do come to Canada and to Ontario universities, that says a lot. So if you look at the big picture globally, what it costs to go to university, whether it's Canada, the States, England, France, you talk about Turkey, yes, where it is more expensive in many of these jurisdictions, that in itself tells you that we are comparable and better than some other places in the world.
I was an international student many years ago.
So to the question of, you know, should there be a cap? I don't, you know, we're not, at this point, we're not considering that. But I think it's a reasonable question to ask.
Recently in the region, we've had some issues just with student housing. There was an issue of an apartment building not being fixed, and it just wasn't ready. And so we had a lot of students that were displaced and didn't have a place to go. And there's currently a rather large court battle going on about getting money back from that company. There isn't really a definition of student housing legally in the province. Do you think something more can be done to protect students renting?
Well, you know, we have pretty stringent protections for tenants, for landlords and tenants, quite frankly, in the province. I think one of the things that becomes a challenge is making sure that the university and the municipality are working together to identify where where housing should expand, how it can expand, and making sure that communities are on site. This is an issue in every university town, and it's something that one of the ways we've addressed it is we've put much more money into institutions who are building student housing, or building residences. But I think it is something that municipalities and universities need to work on together. The local folks.
I know this case you're talking about, so this was a case of the builder not being ready in time, and a lot of the students who had paid their rent, ready to move in for the start of a year, they had to find accommodations elsewhere, but it was a municipal issue, and we don't want to undermine or usurp what the city of Waterloo is doing, so we want to respect their bylaws.
That's why I think having the university and the municipality work together when there are issues, I think that's the best way. Those are really local issues. We have the overarching policy and laws about landlords and tenants, but I think municipalities and institutions need to work together.
Okay.
All right.
That's right.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much for